A chill has fallen in the year. Darkness is presently near. Pumpkins and goblins are everywhere seen. Don't you know? It's Halloween! Oh, it's good to be back. I know I haven't really left, but if you haven't noticed, I haven't done a Halloween special in 3 years. 3 long years. That drives me crazy, honestly. Why? Well, obviously, because Halloween is my favorite holiday of all time. If I'm going to do a YouTube show, it's obvious I'd do it on Halloween. Well, now that I'm back to my October antics, I'm going to attempt to indulge in my love for the weird, bizarre, and creepy. On that note, let's talk Tiny Toon Adventures. I grew up in the 90s, which means I'm well versed in the ways of Buster, Babs, and company, and let me tell you, when it came to the stuff of nightmares, this show reigned supreme. They didn't always do this, but when they did, they held practically nothing back. Now, there's a lot of memorable episodes I can go with, but my favorite absolute scare came from the form of Season 3, Episode 15, The Horror of Slumber Party Mountain. Ooh, the title alone sends shivers up my spine. Essentially, it's a parody of slasher films. Now get this, if you will. A Saturday morning cartoon, or a weekday afternoon cartoon depending on when you watched it, parodied slasher films. Parodied slasher films. If you're wondering the reasons why we love the 90s, I present to you Exhibit A. This episode is hosted in a wraparound by Elmira in a parody of horror host Elvira, which, by the way, is the only time I found her character endearing, to say the least. After some introduction, we're brought into the story, which focuses on Babs, Fifi, and Shirley having a slumber party in a cabin in the woods, scaring each other, having fun, pillow fights, and playing with an Ouija board. Or as I like to refer to it, Exhibit B. When suddenly, the lights switch off. They're attacked by an intruding monster who then slimes them. Upon discovering that the slime is actually shaving cream, the girls eventually deduce that their intruder was actually Buster, Hampton, and Plucky in disguise, and vow their revenge. Meanwhile, our three mischief makers are camping nearby the woods and roasting marshmallows by the fire when Plucky steals Buster's marshmallow. Buster decides to get back by telling the story of One-Eye Jack. Jack was an outcast rabbit who got ran over by a truck of a crazed taxidermist. The taxidermist takes Jack into his studio and stuffs him, remakes him with a pair of antlers. Jack, now a horrifying jackalope, rises up from the dead, destroys the studio, and runs off into the woods where they are camping. This story terrifies Hampton and Plucky, and Buster dismisses it as a legend every camper knows. However, they hear a loud growling from behind a bush, which takes the shape of a head with antlers. Thinking it's One-Eyed Jack, the boys run away, but it's really the girls taking their revenge for the boys ruining their slumber party. All good laughs until they discover that the real One-Eyed Jack is right behind them. He occupies exhibits C through Z for the remainder of this entry. Jack chases the girls through the woods to the abandoned mansion of the taxidermist where Buster, Plucky, and Hampton are hiding. And true to slasher film fashion, Jack proceeds to pick them off, one by one. So what are the plus sides? Well, despite the fact it's a kids' show, this is actually a pretty effective slasher film. Really atmospheric and terrifying from beginning to end. Then, of course, there's our antagonist. One-Eye Jack! I love doing that. I mean, if you want a kid-friendly, iconic horror villain, this is your guy. And kid-friendly is debatable at best. Razor-sharp teeth and claws, one glowing eye, intimidating facial features and body language, and an undeterred will to hunt and capture his victims. This guy is awesome and scary incarnate. Then there's our protagonists, who, despite being thrown into a slasher film parody, are actually smarter than your typical horror heroes. First, there's Fifi, who, being a skunk, uses her stench to stand up to Jack. Then there's Buster, who points out that their only option is to stick together. Granted, none of these ideas actually work, but at least they're willing to use their resources to make a plan of survival in defiance of typical horror cliches. And heck, this is a couple years before movies started pointing out these cliches. Downsides? The episode might be a little too scary for kids, but who cares? I mean, nobody had to pay huge psychotherapy bills for me due to my childhood, although in hindsight they probably should have. But hey, it's a good terrifying horror romp in a kids' television series, which, let's face it, do we really get it as effectively nowadays? Hey, if you enjoyed this entry, click like and subscribe to view more in the near future. Also, comment below. I would love to hear from you. I'm Mike, and this has been a Penguins Rock production.